Today on America's Test Kitchen, Dan cooks pasta frittata with sausage and hot peppers. Chris answers viewer questions and letters to the editor. And Bridget prepares cheese souffle right here on America's Test Kitchen.
If you were to walk down the streets of Rome and someone came up and said, "Ho, hai fatto una frittata," it would mean in the vernacular that you're nuts, but it actually means you made quite a mess. Of course, when you make an omelet or also a frittata, you break a lot of eggs and you do make a mess. Now, omelets probably started in Persia, Iran a long time ago as a cuckoo. It's a very thin omelet that has a lot of herbs in it. Moved on to Spain as the Spanish tortilla, which had potatoes, the frittata, of course, in Italy, and the omelet in France. Today we're going to talk about a very specific type of frittata. It's called the pasta frittata. Of course, it has pasta in it. And there are two different styles. One uses eggs. It's right here. It's very creamy and soft, like a regular frittata. And then there's one that does not have eggs. It has a very crisp top to it. So let's head into the test kitchen with Dan and make a deliciosa pasta frittata. Now, there's a little secret you don't think I know.
What's that?
And that is you want my job.
Well, yeah, I'll take it.
Yeah, everybody wants my job. Now,
Sure.
But there's a long line here, so let's just put on screen. There are two kids who dressed up like me recently. One is Andrew from Virginia. He dressed up like me for Halloween. Voted best costume, by the way.
Really? Okay.
And then Bradley is from Wisconsin. He's 7 years old. He had a career day, and he dressed up like the cooking man. And that's the job he wants.
Wait, so you're saying both of them are in front of me in line?
Well, they're younger.
Yeah, that
You
does help.
have some competition. So.
All right.
Okay.
Well, I'll see what I can do. So, Chris, the great thing about a pasta frittata, or really any frittata, is that you can season it any way you want. So we tried a lot of flavor combinations here, but the one we really liked the most was using sweet Italian sausage and some really hot cherry peppers. So we're going to start focusing on our eggs first. I've got 8 whole eggs in this bowl. We're going to add our fat. And we looked in traditional recipes. A lot of them were butter and lard, which we tried alongside extra virgin olive oil. And we actually preferred the oil. We really tasted the eggs a lot more, and it kind of complemented instead of overpowered it. Okay. So I'm using 3 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil. I've got a half a cup of grated Parmesan cheese, gives a nice flavor boost there. And I'm adding 3 tablespoons of coarsely chopped hot cherry peppers, the ones from the jar. We've got a couple tablespoons of chopped parsley. That's going to add some nice freshness. And finally, I've got a half teaspoon each of salt and pepper. I'm going to whisk this together. And you really want to beat this enough that it's an even color. You don't want little bits of egg white in there. This just takes just a minute here. So I'm just going to set that aside for a second, and we'll deal with the second flavor component, which I mentioned is sweet Italian sausage. And I've taken this out of the casings and crumbled it a little bit, pop it over medium heat, and I'll do most of my crumbling in the pan here as it cooks. So as it cooks, Chris, it's a little bit easier to break up. It's not quite as sticky. So that's about 3.5 minutes there, and you can see some fats rendered out, and it's not fully cooked because it's going to go into the frittata and continue to cook more. Okay. So at this point, I'm going to stir in 2 cloves of garlic that have been sliced thin. And that looks pretty good. They just need about 30 seconds to kind of bloom a little bit, get some flavor and aroma out of there. Great, so I'm gonna turn off the heat here. Bring my egg mixture back over, add it right in. Just kind of stir the egg so it doesn't sit in one spot there. I'm gonna set this aside. Okay, so Chris, if you look at most recipes, they use leftover pasta. That wasn't something we want to deal with because you never know when you're going to have leftovers. We wanted to make this from scratch. So then we looked at what type of noodle to use. And in most traditional recipes, you see long noodles, which makes good sense. They kind of form this web-like network. So we tried spaghetti, which was pretty good, but we actually tried angel hair pasta, and we liked that the best. It's very fine, so it kind of melds very nicely with it. And so I'm going to break every rule in the Italian handbook on cooking pasta. We're going to start with just this skillet, and we're going to start with 3 cups of water. So normally we'd bring 4 quarts of water to a boil, which takes a lot of time, takes a lot of energy. Just going to start with 3 cups here. Okay. And I'm going to add in my pasta, which is also broken in half, which you know is a big no-no as well. In the frittata, it doesn't matter because it's all mixed up. You have no idea how long the noodles are. So this is 6 ounces of angel hair pasta. And as you can tell, I'm adding this to cold water. So not only have we figured out that you don't need to use a large volume of water, but you actually don't even need to start in boiling water. And then I'm also going to add 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt, and finally 3 tablespoons of vegetable oil on top. So what we're going to do is bring this up to a simmer. And we're going to let it cook uncovered until all that water evaporates, and then the oil and the pasta hit the bottom of the skillet. The pasta will be cooked at that point, and then it starts to crisp and brown. So while it's doing that, I'm just going to be kind of vigilant about giving it a few little stirs. Okay, so Chris, this water's come up to a simmer, and I've done a diligent job of keeping it from sticking together. So we're gonna let this cook until the pasta's tender, all the water's evaporated, and then the pasta starts to sizzle in the bottom of the pan. Okay, so Chris, the water is finally totally evaporated. It took about 10 minutes, and you can just start to hear the pasta sizzling on the bottom of the pan. So that's great, that's what we're looking for. At this point, I'm gonna stop stirring, and all I'm gonna do is go around the edge and kind of scrape to make sure it doesn't stick. And then from time to time, give it a little swirl here. We're really starting to set that bottom pasta. Okay, so Chris, this has been about 7 minutes, and it's been browning. You can really smell it at this point. We'll just take a peek underneath, and as you can see, it's starting to turn golden. It's starting to set into a crust. So that's good. That's our next indicator. So what I'm going to do at this point is push up some of this loose pasta on top. I want the whole pan bottom to be pretty much covered with pasta so we get a nice crust. Okay, so that looks good. We've got a nice little nest for our eggs. So we've got our whole mixture over here, and we're just going to pour it right into the center. Scrape it in. And now, Chris, I'm actually going to switch to my tongs for a minute here. As you can see, most of the egg mixture and the sausage kind of sits at the top. So we want to blend it together a little bit. So I'm going through, and I'm not reaching all the way to the bottom because we don't want to disturb that nice crust. I'm just pulling up some loose bits of pasta, kind of helping evenly distribute things. Okay, great. So now that that's pretty well distributed, I'm going to pop my lid on. I'm going to cook this until the top is just barely set and the bottom turns a nice golden brown color. Okay, so Chris, it's been about 7 minutes at this point. I'm going to take off my lid and just check that the top is starting to set. And then I'm going to just put my spatula right in between here and go around and just take a peek. It's browning really nicely, so that looks really good. So now the daunting part, we're going to flip it. So I'm just going to shut the heat off. We're going to use a 2-plate flipping method for this. Makes it a lot easier. I want to make sure that it does not stick in any place, which is going to make it a lot harder. So what I'm going to do is I'm right-handed, so I'm going to hold the pan in my right hand here. I'm going to tilt the plate just a little bit, which is going to give me a little bit more of a cradle for it. I'm going to do it in a quick motion, just like that. So Chris, I'm going to pop this plate on top, and then we just do a quick flip, just like that, and down. Take off this plate.
Ooh, does that look good?
Yeah, so as you can see, it's nice and crispy. We've got really good brown pasta, and it makes a nice crust around the whole thing. So at this point, all I need to do is slide it back into the skillet. We're going to cook that second side just a little bit. And I'm going to use my spatula to go around, just kind of fold that in, give it a nice shape. You can see that it's already starting to set on the bottom. So I'm just going to cook this until we get a little bit of browning on that egg side, which take about 2 to 4 minutes. Okay, so Chris, once we got good browning on the egg side, I moved it off the heat to cook for another 5 minutes kind of indirectly. And at this point, it's cooled off on top, so the easiest way is actually to use your hand. And just bring it over here, flip it, and then slide my hand out.
Nicely done.
So now it's almost time to eat. I just need to cut it up. So your best bet is to slice through the top, and then once you get to the bottom, crunch through.
Thank you.
Yep.
Well, it gets an A for looks, and now we'll see about
And
the
now we'll
rest.
see what the rest.
You know, it's odd to take, I guess leftover pasta in the old days with the idea of an omelet or frittata, but it actually goes really well. It's great texture on the bottom.
So it's good like this, right after cooking, but you can also let this cool. It makes a good lunch, even a picnic kind of thing.
So the secret to great pasta frittata was splitting the difference between a creamy style and then a very crunchy pasta frittata. So you started with eggs, and for a filling, a little bit of sausage that was pre-cooked briefly, cheese, parsley, put that all together, let that sit, and then you went nuts. Then you took a little bit of pasta, a little bit of water, a little bit of oil, and cooked that for a while till the pasta sort of absorbed the water left, and you started to get browning on the bottom. And then we put the filling in, put the top on, and continued to cook that, and then you had to flip it over to finish on the final side. So there you have it, America's Test Kitchen to your kitchen, a very interesting and delicious recipe for pasta frittata. First letter is from Sam from Montana, who writes, "My grandma taught me to bake, and she taught me to always crack the egg first into a small cup or bowl and then add the egg to the batter. I always see you and your crew cracking those eggs directly into the batter with abandon. Well, you're right. We should always crack them into a bowl just in case you get a bad egg. But we did a test to find out if you could tell ahead of time if an egg was fresh or not. We took 3 cartons of eggs, fresh, a month old, 2 months old, and we tried floating them in water, which is the old wives' tale. It turns out it's true. All of the fresh eggs actually sank. The 2-month-old eggs, most of those floated because over time the egg dehydrates and you get a big air sac in the egg. However, just because an egg is old doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. All of those 2-month eggs actually baked up into great cakes, so we had no problem using a 2-month-old egg. Our next letter is from Christina from California, who writes, "I would love your help in settling a dispute in my home. My husband is a good cook, but is under the impression that salt is the most evil of all things. He refuses to use any salt, with the exception of when he adds it to pasta water. Well, he's crazy. First of all, 95% of the salt that he takes in every day comes from outside the home. Processed food, fast foods, restaurant foods, about 5% comes from home cooking, so don't worry about it when you're cooking at home. Secondly, the taste receptors in your mouth, on your palate, Sweet, sour, salty, bitter. There are many more bitter receptors than the other three. When you have salt in your food, that tamps down the receptivity, so you get much more of the other flavors. So that's why food always tastes better with salt. So tell your husband, please use salt. His food's going to taste a lot better. If you'd like to contact us, write us at atk@americastestkitchen.com. Back in the 1960s, Julia Child popularized the cheese souffle, and for a very good reason. It's a short ingredient list, really not that hard to make. You get that great top crust and that cheesy, creamy interior. It tastes great. But for some reason, great things from the past seem to disappear without a trace. So let's go into the test kitchen with Bridget, and let's start a cheese souffle resurrection. You know, one of the first things I learned to cook in the early 70s was the souffle, like I'm sure you did too. And I was told a lot of things about it, which hopefully are not true. They're very finicky. You have to be careful because they'll fall in the oven. You have 90 seconds to serve them before they collapse when you take them out of the oven. You have to get the egg whites just right, and you have to be a master chef and do it hundreds of times. So it's one of those things I used to make. It came out of my repertoire because I go, it's too finicky.
Fussy?
Too fussy. But when I did it right, they were fabulous.
That's right. Yeah, there's a lot of mythology behind the souffle, cheese or otherwise, but it really just boils down to making a bechamel, a very simple sauce that you stabilize with egg whites. You whip the egg whites, fold it in, and bake it. And we're going to also add some cheese to make it even better. All right?
You make it sound so easy.
It is incredibly easy. We are going to make a sauce, but let's talk a little bit first about our baking dish. This is a 2-quart souffle baking dish. Just greased it with some vegetable oil spray here. And here's where we're going to start introducing cheese at the very beginning, because one of the problems that we found with cheese souffles, they didn't really taste like cheese. They tasted like flour. So we're going to add a little bit of Parmesan. This is 2 tablespoons. And use it to dust the dish all the way around. This is going to create kind of that nice Parmesan crust as it cooks. All right, so let's get that souffle started. And we're going to start with the bechamel. Now, for a lot of classic recipes, they use 6 tablespoons of each butter and flour. It's a little over a cup of milk. Well, we found that ratio actually made a souffle that was just too heavy and actually dulled the cheese flavor. So we're going to reduce the amount of butter and flour in our cheese souffle. This is 4 tablespoons of unsalted butter. This goes right in over medium heat. And here's our 4 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. Now we're going to season this. This is a 1/4 teaspoon of paprika and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. I've got an 1/8 of a teaspoon of cayenne pepper. We're using 2 kinds of pepper here. We've got cayenne and white pepper. This is also an 1/8 of a teaspoon. All right, we've got a little bit of nutmeg. That's pretty traditional. It's just a pinch of fresh ground nutmeg. And we'll whisk this mixture together and wait on that butter to finish melting.
So we should probably define what a bechamel is for anyone under 40 out there watching the show.
Well, it's a classic sauce. It's also known as one of the mother sauces because they use it to create other sauces. You start off with a roux, which is what we're doing here, equal parts flour and butter. And then once that's cooked together, you add milk. And depending on the ratio of ingredients, you'll get a thinner sauce or a thicker sauce. So this is melted.